Hello, welcome back to Geezerology, everybody. We are going to start a series today, which we'll have for you for the next few weeks. We are calling this the best of the greatest. These are basically compilation albums, but more than just compilation albums. We want to go with like best of / greatest hits compilations by artists back in the day, and were fairly, essential releases, and stood as good signposts in artist discographies. I actually consider this release, it might have been like a forerunner to the box sets that became popular in the coming decades. But Bob is here to talk about two double albums released on the same day by the Beatles in April of 1973. This was the titles of these two albums were 1962 to 1966, otherwise known as the Red Album, and 1967 to 1970, otherwise known as the Blue Album. And Bob's going to tell us all about these releases.
All right there. Thank you, Scotty. Yeah, it's appropriate to be talking about this right now because we're just a little ways past the 50th anniversary of the release of these two greatest hits albums. And as Scott mentioned, they are both double album sets and were released simultaneously on the same day, April 2nd, 1973. And these albums were the brainchild of Alan Klein, the very controversial rock manager. These two albums came out after the Beatles had broken up. And these were a very, very big deal when they came out. Not only were they huge selling albums, they kind of tended to spark maybe some hopes and rumors that, the Beatles would reunite. Kind of unique covers on them. The cover photograph for the first album had a picture of the four Beatles taken in a stairwell at EMI Records in London. And that photograph was taken like in 1963. And then in 1969, with the adult Beatles, that photo was recreated by the same photographer. The albums also included some interesting packaging material like lyric sheets, which wasn't all that common back there then. And they came with a sheet that kind of detailed the history of the Beatles, which was a cool thing for back then because you didn't have the internet and it wasn't as easy to go and look up. So for the casual Beatles person, it was pretty cool. You got the lyric sheet and you got some history about the Beatles. Now, as with any greatest hits package, there are always going to be complaints about what was included and what was not included. And this is interesting on the two albums that covered the early years of the Beatles. There are no cover songs on here, even though the Beatles kind of got their start with covering material like Twist and Shout. So the songs on the 62 to 66 albums, all original compositions, and all Lennon-McCartney songs. There's nothing on the first two albums from George Harrison, which I thought was an interesting omission. The Beatles also tried to distance themselves from this, and they all claimed that, they didn't know anything about it, that this was all Klein's deal. And supposedly the story is that when it came out and George Harrison saw what was on the album, kind of went, well, I guess it's a little incomplete, which was an understatement. They both came out to great acclaim, fantastic sales. The 62 to 66 album went to number 3 on the Billboard record charts. And the other one, the 67 to 70, went all the way to number 1. So they were hugely successful. The two albums were released in CD version in 1993, based off new digital masters. And then it was remastered again in 2010. And then they did a remastered vinyl edition in 2014. So the big question comes, are these still relevant in today's time? And I would say that they are. If you're a real rabid Beatles person, you're going to be delving into all of their stuff. But for a person maybe young today who, hears their grandparents or their parents go about how fantastic the Beatles were, not a bad place to go to get an introduction. And you can get distinct breakdowns of the two phases of the Beatles. we get the Mop Top, the Fab Four stuff from the earlier edition, and then the second set of albums delves into the adult Beatles, when they started doing concept albums and delved more into psychedelia and really expanded their use of various instruments and things such as this. So they're both very, very, very good overviews of the Beatles. And as you know, the Beatles were fairly prolific, did a lot of albums, and did they have some filler material on there? I think they kind of did. So if you're not really familiar with them and you want to get a good overview of them, not bad places to go.
62 to 66, I mean, did Harrison really have much to offer then? I mean, he really didn't really start writing until later, right?
Well, he had Taxman, and that wasn't on there. And so I know that he doesn't have any compositions on there, but I don't think there's even anything on there where he does like lead vocals or anything. He's got material on the second set of albums, but not on the first. So
yeah, I remember buying these two albums when they came out. This would have been after I was out of high school, and I think probably Abbey Road was the only Beatles album that I had ever bought until these came out. I bought these, and I know I got a lot more use out of the Blue album than I did the Red album.
I was 13 when they came out, and I had enough money to buy one. And I recognized, because my friends and I, we didn't have album collections. Our older brothers and sisters had whatever they had, and you would hear some songs on the radio, but it was never in any kind of chronological order or any kind of sense that you could make of them. So you wouldn't really know if a song came from Rubber Soul or from, Beatles for Sale or Magical Mystery Tour. So I recognized more songs on the Blue album, so I bought that one. And I've been, to be honest, it really kind of screwed me up because I loved it. But then, when I eventually had enough money to buy the Red one, which is like 6 months later, I did not like the Red material as well, because I didn't appreciate the gestation and the growth of their sound. And, especially, I mean, even to this day, Love Me Do, I hate that song. I hate Love Me Do. And I can barely tolerate Please Please Me. But once we get past that, I'm okay. It's just, it's not the song, it's the sound, it's the production, which is it was of its time.
Well, yeah. Well, that's pretty much my same story. A few years older and into my music listening experience than you did, but the same with me. I had a lot more appreciation for the later stuff than that earlier stuff. And back then, I mean, even at that young of an age, I thought that earlier stuff was just a little too crude for my taste,
Yeah.
And I went back and listened to the Red album. I wanted to go see it because I didn't know if they were still around or not. So I found it on Apple Music, and I listened to the Red album, and that was the first thing that jumped out at me was that where's Twist and Shout? Because Twist and Shout, I eventually did when they all came out on CD. I bought all the Beatles albums on CD when they came out in the mid '80s or whatever it was, and those first two or three albums, I mean, by far my favorite Beatles track was Twist and Shout, but that was a cover.
I will be the typical outlier here. I kind of go the other way. I tend to favor their earlier material a little better over their later stuff. And for a couple of reasons. One, even though some of their earlier stuff was kind of poppy, the Fab Four stuff, it was light years ahead of what anybody else was doing at that time in that style of music.
I think it's just interesting to watch how they evolved musically. I always thought their early sound was Chuck Berry, as far as the guitarist, and their vocal harmonies were taken from Everly Brothers and throw in a little bit of Little Richard, and then they had their own trademarks.
It's all, even within the Red album and within the Blue album, within the individual ones, they're all in chronological order by release date. So it gives you a good look at capsule look at the evolution of the Beatles, which was a big, huge evolution for such a short period of time.
Yes,
right?
it was.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the track listings across all 4 albums. And if you look at it, it just kind of overwhelms you with how much incredible material these guys created. There's great stuff on both of these albums. So,
Yeah, and about what, like a 5 or 6 year time frame. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back with some more of these greatest of the best compilations coming up in the next few weeks. So check us out, hit that subscribe button, and we will talk to you soon. So long.
Now you got the right to sing the old man blues. They're trading your Playboy for some hush puppy shoes. One more time.